Hello, everybody, and hello, Jane. Thank you for being here in your morning and my afternoon today. So, thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you for having me.
It's a
Yeah.
pleasure. It's such a
Mhm.
pleasure. And before we dive into all the, I would say, wisdoms, really, and the meaningful work that you offer to the world, I would really appreciate that you can introduce yourself through a movement practice or through any practice that you like. So, it's your own introduction through the practice.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll come into our hands today. Hand symbolism is a huge part of my work. Uh, and Jung kind of said what the intellect has struggled with in vain, the hands can kind of solve. I didn't get that quote exactly right, but so I feel like our hands are definitely a window into all aspects of our psyche. So maybe we can come in and do a little bit of hand work, and we'll just start by rubbing our hands together and just feeling that contact. Yeah. And really looking at your hands, looking at the skin on your hands, looking at your knuckles, looking at your veins and the little marks on your hands, and just thinking, these are my hands. And for folks who don't have full use of both of their hands, this could bring up some feelings, or if you have pain in your hands, it'll also bring up some feelings, and we won't stay there for too long. And then without it being too loud, we're going to do some clapping just to really activate the receptors. So that might be a bit loud for the podcast, but I'll go a little quiet. Listeners, you can really try to almost create like a stinging feeling in your palms. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And maybe rub a little bit more. And this is always a fun little thing to do, is to gradually start to peel your hands away from one another and see if you can feel anything between your hands. Feel the aliveness of the touch receptors in your hands. I'm just staying with that. And then imagine that your hands might start almost dancing with each other. And I love doing this with a piece of music as well, where you just start almost like your hands are starting to move together in a bit of a dance. You can even imagine that you have a sacred object between your hands that you're cradling and moving. Yeah. Really looking at your hands and just, these are my hands. These are my hands, no one else's hands. And how many things do your hands do for you in a day? And the polarities that our hands hold, the ability to create and love, the ability to destroy, the ability to connect, the ability to protect. And so all the polarities of our psyche are kind of represented by all the potentialities of the things our hands can do: nourish, love, hurt, heal, harm. We all have that potential inside of us, don't we? Yeah. And then if we just take our hands and maybe place them on our face and just cradle your face for a second. And think about someone that you love. I love touching people's faces that I love. I just, depending on the person, but imagine you're cradling the face of someone you love, and you're just taking in the warmth of their skin. You can think of someone, and maybe recall memories of touching that person's face and feel it. Really feeling into them. And then this person you love might You might have glimmers of that for yourself, tenderness towards yourself, and feeling your face, feeling your bones, feeling the warmth, feeling the texture of your skin. And then maybe the last thing we'll do is take your hand on your forehead. If you have mobility in your shoulders for this, hand on your forehead, hand on the base of your skull. And imagine you're sending light between both of your hands here. We're connecting the bottom of the brain with the prefrontal cortex here. Yeah, just kind of bringing it together. And if there's a place on your body that your hand feels like it could provide some comfort to, we might finish there. What part of your body needs some comfort? It could be a hug, it could be hand on heart, hand on belly. It could be,
Mm. Mm. So now I'm just heading to a nap.
oh
Squeeze
no,
everybody.
put you to sleep.
I love it. I love this
Uh,
feeling of just lowering the intensity of my presence, but now not in the dissociating way, but the other side, actually, like just deepening myself into myself, kind of like just landing into my whole self, and just love that. Yeah. Mm. So many words came up, so thank you just so much for this practice. And I had some scars, like on my skin, and a tattoo as well. I just wrote breathe, well, in French, so respire. It's very tiny here, and it was supposed to disappear, when your fingers just touch each other. And I thought, like, when it's gone, it means that I don't have to think about it anymore, and that I will breathe quite naturally, and yeah, without focusing on it. And well, it's still there, so I still have work to do, like everybody. So it just felt like reclaiming, in a way, just like not forgetting about any part of me, even though they are far from me, from my head, but still, like, they're here as well. And I appreciate that kind of containing myself as well. So yeah, it felt
Nice.
very soothing. Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
And that's really exactly like all the terms that you used, and doing the practice, like aliveness and complexity, and also holding, caring. And all of these are just super important terms to me, especially in the wellness or well-being industry, and this, well, huge world that we live in. And I really wanted to have you on this podcast because of those reasons, and the way that I feel you nuance it all and you balance it all, and not kind of falling into one idea on one very stock vision of what it means to be well, and what it means to be alive, and how are we supposed to feel and look and live like. And I'm just happy that we can remove the pressure out of being well. It's kind of, a paradox in itself. And I can sometimes feel anger, but also, wow, feeling lost. Like, then how do we do that? And simply by returning to one part, as we did, just one part of our body, just how simple and yet magical it is. And as you said, like, it's just contains, the microcosm and the macro. It's just like, well, we can do anything with this, and as well in our lives. So it's powerful, just so powerful.
Yeah, sort of like how the body holds all of our polarities, yet sometimes in the wellness world, there's this edification of the body as being this like pleasure, all giving kind of
Mm.
divine being that we can call upon. And it's like, no, we're getting into the depths with our
Mm.
body. We're diving into both and all the time. So yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
I'm definitely not, especially as a Jungian. I just finished my training as a Jungian analyst. It yeah, the polarities are so important. Holding the tension of the opposites, not landing on a really one-sided attitude, even towards our bodies, helps us hold more. It helps us hold the complexity of who we are more. And in that, it really depathologizes our complexity at the same time.
Mm. And the ones of others as well, right? Like just
Mhm.
seeing others as human being using different strategies at different times of their lives and having their history, and not just they're crazy and I'm okay and they are bad and like that's it. Well, that's kind of reassuring and well, easy, I don't know, but yeah, reassuring for sure. And but well, then the story ends. It's like not opening or not widening the conversation, whereas what you said, like both end. And it's really it can be hard because it's complex. So I'm curious about how you did navigate that before maybe meeting the Jungian terminology or way of perceiving the world as well. Was it something that was already interesting you, or is it something
Oh
that you
yeah.
just discovered? Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, no. It evolved over time. As a personal trainer for many
Mm.
years, movement coach, moving into somatic therapy as well. Um, I met people who were suffering greatly with illness, for
Mm.
example, that could find aliveness at the same time. You know,
Mm.
even with degenerative health conditions, there were like these glimmers of aliveness and joy and pleasure at the same time. So it's not that we were making them, quote, well, we were helping them reconnect with parts of themselves and even aspects of their body that were still working well. So but I found the more I worked in, you know, working with people's bodies as they were going through a lot of difficult things, and all the research, all the hours I spent with people, and often people who were struggling and might not be pleasant all the time, you know, it's just
Mm.
um there was just a huge curiosity that was awoken in me that drove a lot of my own research, a lot of my own kind of curating,
Mm.
training for myself, that made me want to go deeper. And there was no other way to go and to continue doing my work and serving my clients. So, yeah.
Yeah, not just the surface and like the beauty aspect of it, like, oh, it's wonderful, like the spiritual bypass, really. We don't have this term in French. Well, I'm French, so it's like, well, I try to find some similar words, but it exists, but not really like spiritual bypassing. That's such an interesting concept, and I love that it exists, just to remind ourselves how we can fall into that trap as well. And I kind of consider Jung's work and the shadow works, for example, and the really deepening and diving into it as a source of light in the other side. But if we don't go there, then we don't learn, quote unquote, from them, and we feel blocked by them. So
Mhm.
it's so interesting how we can, by willing to avoid, we just miss it out. We just miss it out so easily, and as an individual, but also as a society, and how easy it is to just consider all the, all Black people as terrorists. Like in French, it's really the thing, like because one individual was Black, and just murdered other people. Like, well, all the Black community is dangerous. It's like, well, guys, wake up. Like, not at all. And it's, to me, that is dangerous. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, Jung really believed that the way we deal with, say, totalitarianism,
mm,
racism, all the isms,
mm,
was to go deeper inside of ourselves. And when we do that, we learn how to withdraw projections onto other people. We
mm,
go into our own shit, we go into our own darkness. And so when I think about like mystics, for example, they want to pull us up into what is life-giving, what is affirming, what is divine, but at the same time get us to balance out that into a dive into the depths,
mm,
right?
mm,
that keep us real, that keep us like, so it has to be both ends. We
Yeah.
can't do one without the other, without getting off balance, psychically and spiritually.
Yeah, totally. Like, and I'm a yoga teacher, so definitely, when you see the pictures of like people sitting cross-legged and you see the kind of column, like the light column, where it goes upward and then downward as well. So in both directions, and both are needed and enlivening as well and important. So that's beautiful to find this kind of balance. And I guess that leads to resourcing ourselves, because diving into the depths and, as you said, maybe just bringing our hands on the face can trigger something, or can, just trigger memories, either they are comfortable or not. And so what do we do with this material, really? I'm curious about the ideas that come up with for you. Like, what do we do when we dove into it, even though it wasn't meant to, but let's say like you just do a practice and then something happens. Well, that shit is here now. So what do we do with it?
You're asking me what we do with it? It
For
really depends.
example, yeah, it depends.
It depends on the
Yeah.
person, really.
Mm,
Depends
mm,
on what's going on for that person.
mm,
And diving into the depths requires some ego stability.
yeah.
Um, Otherwise, it can be very destabilizing. So it really depends on the person. What do we do with it? Well, obviously, I'm a Jungian analyst, and I've done hundreds of hours of my own personal analysis. So, on my own inner work. So I would be like, well, you probably need a guide. you know,
Yeah.
we can't really like guide ourselves in the dark. We need someone to
Mm,
kind of hold up a torch for us.
mm,
Um, so yeah, and the body is so labyrinthian
mm,
that we need someone who can hold us when we feel lost as well. Sort of like an anchor outside of the labyrinth that holds that golden string that Ariadne gave to Theseus in the myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth.
mm,
So I find the exploration into the body is so much less linear than labyrinthian, and we often need support in doing that. And I think a lot of people would prefer to not have to do that sometimes, because it's not. Jungian analysis in some ways has been called a safe place for an inner revolution.
mm,
And so it does sometimes, when we start to bring up a lot more of, the polarities inside of ourselves, our experience, our body, our psyche, it can create a lot of change in our life. It could be somewhat destabilizing. It can, it has to go at whatever pace people can handle, but you don't
mm,
know you do not know, once you open up the door into the depths, you do not know what your soul or yourself or is going to be asking of you.
mm,
And many people think of Jungian analysis as soul psychology.
mm,
So when we start listening to the demands of our soul,
mm,
they're not, and we have to choose how we act on those demands. It doesn't often mean things are easier for a while.
yeah. Mm,
So that's why I'm really pro guide. There's not a lot of Jungian analysts on the planet, so they're hard to find, but there's many people who are really well trained to help people navigate as well. So
yeah. Yeah, appreciate that reminder, kind of, because in the internet era, we can find so many self-made resources and self-practices, and just be on your own in your bedroom and do some shaking. And well, it can be both, both and it can be helpful and also very nurturing and safer to have somebody for you to just facilitate the space, as you said, and guide you as well. And this co-regulation aspect is just inherent to our needs, our vital needs to connect. Well, I would rather say it in physical if we can in person, but well, even right now, just sharing ideas and insights with another person that I value, and I'm just like, well, that is nurturing for my body. And if I'm just journeying alone, well, it's kind of less live and less also enriching, because I also need counter ideas and counter opinions to grow and to be faced with my own beliefs and my own habits. And as you said, when we enter the inner revolutionary process, well, it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of a mess at times, and it's not really pretty and glamorous every day, and like we don't wake up, like very fresh and eating, cupcakes and being well, no, that doesn't really exist in the human world. So
Yeah.
it's again a kind of a default mode in the wellness world that I'm just, well, not sure that it helps a lot, really. So,
Well,
mm,
I'm pro people doing whatever they need to do to resource
mm,
themselves. That's
yeah,
great. And not everybody needs therapy. I'm not,
mm,
but
mm,
I will say that we can't see our own backs.
mm,
And when we work from a depth perspective, we're going into aspects of ourselves we didn't already know.
mm,
But if we don't have someone to help reflect or point out things that we can't see because we can't see our blind spots, so to speak, it can just keep us stuck in some ways because we're just going based on what we already know, or
mm,
we make meaning out of sensations in our body that are just about cause and effect versus
mm,
like a teleological perspective of where is my psyche trying to lead me.
mm.
So for example, it's really hard to do your own dream interpretation
Yeah.
because dreams always point out things we don't already know. But when people don't have a lot of experience getting support and analyzing their own dreams, we miss the gold in the dreams because
Mm,
dreams don't waste their spit. Like they try to show us things that we aren't already aware of. And so there's a way to guide someone through looking at their dreams that get them out of like more stuck neural pathways and help them see the polarities again and to see what their psyche is trying to show them through dream images. And I work somatically with dreams as well. And so that's really powerful. So I
mm,
do think we need someone who can help us see things we don't already know.
mm. Yeah, definitely.
And
Mm,
the tricky thing is there's a lot when people have complex trauma histories, and they look at things happening in their bodies or in dreams. There's this like immediate to a negative association with something versus like a more expansive, like where's this going? Like where do things want to move, you know?
mm, like listening and being open to receive instead of like just, yeah, I know, I'm just heading there and just confirming the narrative and the story that is already here. And that if you are in therapy or working with somebody, it is very possible that you want to change the narrative. So if it's just confirming the same one, it's just, well, not diving in the same way. So yeah, appreciate that. And I like the idea of like you can't look backwards. So yeah, definitely. Like
Well,
you
the thing
can't
is,
check it. Mm,
yeah, well, like when I think about a lot of somatic practice, that it's really Freudian based, and it's
mm,
been in the sense of like what's going on in our body is a matter of repression. So
mm,
Freud sort of looked at the unconscious just on the personal layer, which is what's held in our unconsciouses and maybe in our bodies as somatic practitioners is something that was caused by something in the past, and then we try to make connections between this happened to me, so I'm feeling this, and this happened to me, right? But Jung became a lot more interested in the unconscious in terms of what is coming into being, what wants
mm,
to come into being, where is the psyche, where's the self-regulating function of the psyche happening to bring us forward. So so in some ways with trauma orientation to somatic, sometimes we get caught in that area of repression that I need to get this out of my body. I'm feeling this
mm,
because of this, and I need to get it out. And it doesn't
mm,
work that way because we aren't actually paying homage to the power of the unconscious to try to guide us and to not just ask for things from our unconscious to help us feel better, but to also have the fortitude to listen to our soul in the unconscious and what's being asked of us in our life today.
Wow, so enriching. Yeah, I feel like it's either or, like the first one, just looping back to the cause and really like what triggered that and why am I this way. It's really attached to me to, again, the wellness culture and the urgency culture as well, like to be linearly healing and like this is wrong with me, like because of whatever, and I have to get done with it and to get rid of it and I have to be fixed. Whereas the Jungian approach that you just described is feels to me way more compassionate and whole and humanistic and like, hey, yes, things happens and shit happens all the time, for sure. And yet, what can we learn from that and how can we kind of connect with the impulse and the, yeah, I love that what you said, like the soul calling you to do something with that or from that. And what are you willing to build and who are you willing to be, even though this is a part of you. But as you said at the beginning, we aren't only our trauma or our identity. Our identity isn't what just brought us here. It is also what we can do and what we want to do from here. So I appreciate that. Yeah. And actually, your work really, the Jungian Somatics, and you've got a website of it, so I will link it in bio as well. I was curious about what really is your goal or your vision, if you have a specific one behind this body of work, really.
Well, it shifts over time, and it's always a bit of a moving target because I'm really never done learning myself. I'm on a bit of a mission to show that Jung's work was always embodied, because when I first started in my Jungian Analyst training program, I was like, I'm going to be the body person in the room, and I'm going to have to work hard to weave my work in somatics together with Jungian theory. But the more I sat in Jung's work, and the more I read, and the more I studied, and the more I made connections, the more I just saw the body throughout Jung's work. And so for me, when I think about weaving somatics and Jungian theory together, it's not even so much of a weave as it is an unveiling of something that was already there. But our cultural complexes have kind of negated the importance of the body, because Jung was very embodied. In his Red Book time, he did a lot of movement activities. He did vigorous yoga to help calm his nervous system. It's almost like the Red Book is a trauma recovery program that involved, expressive arts. He built things. He returned to his inner child. He used his imagination to create, to understand himself, to resource himself archetypally as well. So for me, part of the Jungian somatics work is to just, in some ways, honor what has been negated in Jung's work, and to also, again, bring complexity and mystery and expansiveness to somatic work. So it goes both ways. But yeah, very much I'm on a mission to show Jungians that the body has always been there, because I changed my thesis topic last year, but I went through, as part of my procrastination, I went through a lot of Jung's work, his collected works, and I pulled out quotes about the body that were all there. Because he studied with Pierre Jouannet, who was a neurophysiologist, neuropsychologist. Pierre Jouannet was the first person to name dissociation. He was embodied. He was studying physiology as well. And then, as we know, Pierre Jouannet's work is really woven into a lot of current trauma theory, woven into sensory motor psychotherapy, which, so it's all there. I'm just sort of there's so much more. It's almost, I find when the body is included in Jungian analysis, for example, it increases the size of this sort of alchemical container that the psyche can transform inside of.
You mean that you perceive it or you see results as well? Is that what you mean? What
No,
results?
it's like
Yeah.
when we bring in a somatic orientation, it creates more doorways into the unconscious, but
Yeah.
it also increases our capacity to stay with the tension that's necessary for what's called the transcendent function. It's like the body is a place we track tension, we hold tension, we can track what we refer to in Jungian theory as complexes.
Mm-hmm.
Complexes have physiological components to them. And we learn how to work with the alchemical process that's involved in the individuation process. And we can use our bodies as a way to increase our capacity to hold that tension and discomfort so we can stay in it, stay in the a bit more of the struggle too.
Yeah, kind of finding comfort in the discomfort or being
I
with
don't
it. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know if there's comfort in the discomfort.
Mm.
I would hate to say that there is, but there is a necessary need to expand our capacity to stay with not knowing, for example, stay
Yeah.
in stay in liminality, stay in the impulse to act and say and speak and needing to be able to contain that. And our body can be a way that we can really build this psychic strength. Because I call that kind of holding of tension in our body is like a psychic plank. So you know when you psychic plank, you know when you do plank, you're holding still,
Yeah.
but it's quite effortful and you're building strength at the same time. Not that planks are all that, but it feels a bit like that. And it is woven into the Tao of non-doing as well. So when we start doing kind of confronting our complexes, for example, if we aren't aware of what we're feeling in our bodies as we're trying to confront them and have a more conscious choice about not letting them take over and drive our behavior, we need to be able to feel it before it takes over.
To have the space for it instead of like resisting and pulling it away, and then it just comes back even stronger. And then we don't have the space anymore. So yeah. Yeah, being with definitely. I'm practicing a lot of somatic experiencing for my own therapeutic journey and also adding it and studying it into yoga as well. And I just appreciate what you said, like being in a mission of proving that it was already there and that we just missed the point and that we kind of ignored a very huge part of what Jung said. And I kind of feel the same, a similar impulse of not proving, maybe that's not the, yeah, well, reminding humanity, just humbling humanity that, yoga said it all like 200 or 300 years ago. And I'm just fascinated of how we can forget about all these concepts and then rebuilding them and then sailing them, also in the culture and just the most efficient ways to be well sometimes are the free ones, like, drinking water and connecting with friends and moving your body and just breathing. And how fun is it that we just created so many stuff really around what it means to be good, and yet everything is inside and everything comes from inside if we pay attention to it and if we have guides or inner guides as well, like soul callings that are just here to facilitate the space and be with it. And again, how simple and yet mysterious it is. And the don't know part of it, like just I don't know, how powerful is this sentence? Like, just, I don't know. And I'm willing to discover it with you all. Like, for example, I just tell my students very often, like, I just discovered that and I just don't have any idea about what it means. And yet, are you willing to play with me? Like, are you willing to discover it? And then we can just go in the inner and then collective as well, discovery process of it. So just maybe having some feedback in the end of the class, or it can be anything, but really the humbleness that is also required sometimes to don't be stuck on the answers and like the I know and I'm sure about it, as we said at the beginning. And we just so need it like in the yoga world, because I know this world a little bit, and in the somatics world as well. And it became such a buzzword as well, somatics and trauma informed, and like it was there, it was already there. And sometimes it's tiring and frustrating. I can feel that we just pick some concepts and build something around it. And well, it was here before us, way before us. So yeah.
Yeah,
Mm, mm,
for sure.
mm.
Yeah, it reminds me of why I stepped out of social media about 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm like, something isn't good here about how much trauma content there is, how
Mm,
inundated people are with mental
mm,
health information. Yeah, and just what was happening with the discourse around somatics. And it was there was so much shadow showing up in kind of the social media world that I'm like, this doesn't feel like a generative place. Now,
mm,
that might not be the case for everybody, but where I was at in my kind of thought leadership role in some ways,
mm,
I was like, no, I got to step out. There's something kind of amiss with the kind of the plethora of trauma content that doesn't actually lead to any healing for people.
mm.
In fact, there's a lot of I work with a lot of psychotherapists as clients and as students. And sometimes I'm just like, stop reading about somatics and trauma. Stop.
Mm.
It's actually making you less well.
Yeah, stop using the psyche to understand something that is whole as well, and like
I would even maybe like, but I do think that the intellect is really important. I
mm,
think in the
mm,
somatic world, the intellect is considered like you're
yeah.
not doing somatics if your mind is
Mm,
involved. I'm like, no, no, no. Now
mm,
what we've done is we've just flipped Descartes on its head. Descartes, you know.
yeah. I'm
And I'm like,
French, I know Descartes.
yeah, of course,
Yeah.
yeah. So now all of a sudden the intellect isn't important. No, the intellect
Mm,
is really important. It's not one or the other.
mm,
Um, and so, for quite a while, for many years, people would be like, "Oh, I'm in my head. I'm doing it wrong." I'm like,
mm.
no, like,
I
no.
love that. That's something that I can tell myself sometimes. Well, maybe not right now, but thanks to somatic experiencing, I guess, because this therapist is just offering like what is here, and if it's thoughts, well, like thoughts. Like we just don't care about it. Like it's okay if you are very intellectual and using this part of you maybe more than sensing or feeling. And I just wonder, maybe for me, I'm kind of afraid sometimes that thinking becomes just the escaping mode. And again, then I'm just like, well, okay, I'm being with what is. Thinking becomes my escaping, and that's it. But yeah, I appreciate what you said. Like both are important, and neurons are everywhere in the body as well. So how is it that we say we think, and then I just literally show my head? So even here, it's not coherent in itself. So
But
like the
isn't
brain is in the old system. So
but isn't the brain okay? So if we have a body,
yeah.
then what is our head? Is it not part of our body?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so simple again. It's like, well, how did you come with that idea, Descartes? Like, what came up for you? Like, I'm just curious. Yeah.
And it's
Crazy.
funny, like with my Jungian Somatics training program,
Mm.
there's a lot of reading.
Mm.
It's not just experiential. We have to, on a certain level, sometimes understand and bring some of our intellect to create a framework. So, some people are like, wow, I'm like, yeah, if you take my Jungian Somatics program, there will be study. You will
Mm.
have to study. You will have to, it's both and like it's
Mm.
experiential, it's intellectual, it's expressive, it's all of it.
All of
And
it. Mm. Yeah, I appreciate that. It reminds me of the sense of guilt that I could feel sometimes when I would just offer my students to read an ancient text, or me reading them something, and just talking. And I was like, oh my God, like we forgot the somatic aspect of it in the very beginning. I was like, well, now I'm like, well, it is also part of it, and making sense out of the words and how they land. And you can do many practices around speaking or hearing or just understanding something. So yeah, appreciate that as well. Mm,
and sometimes like the alchemy from a somatic experience or and I'm not referring to somatic experiencing,
yeah.
but
Mm,
what I found in my work as a somatic coach therapist, I could
mm,
pull up a lot of material from the body And then I'd be like, okay, now go take it to your therapist, right? Because it has to be worked with. There has to be an alchemical process that happens with that somatic material that we pull up. And so that alchemical process involves all aspects of who we are, right? Like, I love the question of like, okay, well, what is observing the body? Does the body observe itself? Like, can the body observe itself? No. What is observing our body? And when we think of that, we have to understand that our minds are really a key aspect of how we relate to our bodies, because it's our brains that is observing and making sense of the material that we pull up from our bodies in movement practice or somatic practice. So it's sort of like, well, what aspect of you, like, I mean, have you ever thought of that? Like, what is observing your body?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite so central to yoga. Like, who am I? Who is the I observing the breath? Like, who is breathing? Like, this kind of inquiry, really, and how mysterious it can feel and spiritually enhancing, really. Like, hey, you are breathing thanks to the plants, and then, they are breathing thanks to you. And who is my heart? Where is it in my body? And how do you feel it? And it's just, yeah, very, yeah,
But like
very central.
neurobiologically, it's different aspects of our brain that are observing our body.
Mm.
How else like do we observe sensory motor receptors? It's like it's through our brain. So how our brain is doing and the health of our brain is really essential for for relating to our body. Yeah.
Yeah, Body Bainbridge Cohen, maybe she's the founder of Body Mind Centering, well, a somatic practice, and she wrote, I don't remember the exact quote, but like something that the brain is the last to know, and yet is the first to inform back all the rest of the body, and how it's vice versa, and as you said, it's both and even inside of us. So it's not, as you said, like the head on one side and the rest of the body on the other side. It's really informing each other, and none of the other is less important than. So yeah, that's a great reminder as well, and how we can push it away in the somatic world or the yoga world. Like, don't judge yourself, or think positive, and yet like don't think too much. It's like it's chaotic, really, because we tend to have a strong opinion on one side or the other, yet it's the entire experience of it. So we need to step back as well and pay attention and kind of weave a connection, as you said, like how do you relate to yourself, and how are you meeting yourself and being met by yourself? I don't know if it makes any sense in English, but really meeting and being met, and yeah, the interconnection. Yeah, love that. And it looks back to me to what you said, like considering symptoms of or sensations or really as messengers or dreams, instead of just ignoring or willing to fix them. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to jump back to the social media. And I just adore your work even more because you stopped using them. So I'm like, yeah, she did it. We can do that as well. And yet I'm just like, well, how do I find students without it? So I'm just like, facing as well a reality kind of, or maybe my biased reality. I don't know. But just, yeah, I'm curious, like, how do you, or how did you, build or kept building your business and sustained yourself without it in the era of social media, if you're open to.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I actually met with a colleague and a friend yesterday for a little catch up.
Yeah.
And we were talking about social media and how much has changed, even the tone in social media since I've been off it in 2.5 years. I was more able to do that than many because I built up a really solid newsletter list. So yeah, if you want to follow my work, anybody listening, you can go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. I send out maybe 1 or 2 newsletters a month.
Yeah, and they are very complete and enriching. So it's just not, like the typical newsletter, like, I love it.
I try. I'll have more bandwidth for writing now that I'm done my program, but So I had a really solid newsletter list, and in Canada, we had to really do a cleaning of our newsletter lists about 4 years ago. So it's only opt-in, like, so I had a really strong, decent sized newsletter list. And it's funny, I was like, oh, newsletters are dead when I was on social media. And then I'm like, oh, well, actually, because I have that, I can probably survive not being on social media. But for other people, like, yeah, it's essential. And so I've written a lot about this. My thesis was on social media, and I had some really potent case material from a few practitioners who actually had to navigate how to interact with social media. Yeah, so I built up enough of a reputation over many years that it was more accessible to me to be off social media. But for other people, there's key questions that I brought up in my thesis that I think are really important. If you're in psychotherapy, I think so bringing your social media use into that container is really, really helpful, because it impacts our autonomic nervous systems. It impacts like our capacity to stay with our own truth, to not filter all of our interests, our activities as practitioners through a perceived audience. But it's my questions to people are like, how often do you use social media a day? What do you do between clients or classes? Do you have control over how often you check social media? Can you do it in a very discreet way, meaning you put aside a half hour once a day to do it? Because how often you keep that door open to social media in your day is really important. So it would be like using any substance, how bringing consciousness to how we interact with a substance, because social media is so incredibly addictive, particularly when you're a self-employed person who relies on it for income. And so it can really amplify our survival fears. So are you using a social media before bed, in the morning? Like, how much control and choice do you have about when and how long and how often you use social media? And if people don't have a capacity to really limit and restrict and be very conscious about social media use, I sometimes think people need to step back and let their brains recover for a couple months. You know, but yeah, this is the world we live in. I'm unlikely to get back onto social media because I don't think you can fit Jung's work and Jungian concepts into a tiny square.
Yeah, yeah, even just the tech itself is just so narrowing our vision and our perception. It's always like front body, and like as you said at the beginning, like who's checking your back? Like even not ourselves, like we're not even using the back body. It's like always like front and like just going ahead and using it more and having more followers or clients. Or and as you said, it's tricky because sometimes we just need it, quote unquote, or we think that we need it for business, and at least we haven't found any alternatives and strategies as a newsletter list, for example. And that's fun because I discovered your work in Cora Giroux's podcast in 2020, and she was really into social media and navigating really and surviving social media, and how important it was to have a newsletter list. So it just highlighted for me. So I appreciate that reminder as well. And definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think they're doing work to build their business by engaging on social media, but it's like I have a business degree. My undergrad is in business, so I bring a real practicalities to it, and so much of what was drilled into me during that time, so many years ago, was relationships. It's like, no, sales comes through relationships. What are you doing to build your relationships? And so when we think about sales, selling to complete strangers is like often the last resort.
Wow.
Right, if you think of it. And so it can kind of being really engaged with social media can sometimes create an illusion that you're building your business.
Yeah.
when in reality, you're just speaking out into a void, and you're hoping that some stranger you don't already know is going to somehow be inspired by a post like it. But then if you look closer, it's like, well, where are you building your business from? It should come from the people that you already know first, who can act as your sales force.
Yeah.
References, referrals, it's all there, right? And then you expand outwards, and social media is like the outer rim of like your sales circle. I mean, it's like, do the scary thing, call people, meet with people, make connections with people. Like, that's where it comes from. And relationships, I had my first studio in 2006. And before that, I was working full-time as a movement coach for several years, maybe 5 years before that. But it's all about relationships. I could not have survived without the support of people who already knew me and knew my work, and really tending to those relationships. And that can be scary for some people, especially introverts, but you do have to make those connections, right? So I think people need to step back and see if what they're actually doing on social media is building relationships. If it's not, you're not building your business.
Yeah, and then maybe you're just responding to another trauma response, really, and just feeding these loops and not really, nurturing yourself deeply. So, and using, like feeding them, like the social media builders as well, instead of, you're being used by them, really, instead of using them. So yeah, that can be very, very tricky and very addictive. So I appreciate that. And I love that, the relationship is the baseline of building a business, really. And yet, like, through the screen, it can be easy to be with people, but really, like, do you know your neighbors? Like, are you sure? So yeah, again, coming back to the roots, really, and the primal needs that we just crave for: connection and bonding and belonging. And how can we belong in a world that is just this size and seen from 8 billion people? Like, it's just nonsense. So yeah, definitely, I appreciate that. Just looping back to the old school and like what we already know and what is present in ourselves. So yeah, love that. And that answers also the questions, like, how do you build community without social media? I was curious for yourself, but you mentioned a friend that you came visit, and yeah.
Oh yeah, I have like a
Yeah.
very rich social life for
Yeah.
sure.
Mm.
But I tend to be like, they're all from different,
Yeah.
you know,
Mm.
I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily like a group person, although I
Mm.
would say I found it really powerful. Like, 'cause there's so many somatic practitioners like I was, who did like piecemeal trainings, 2 weeks here, and it was far different anchoring into a program for 4 years and finding a sense of like continuity, community to a certain extent, and the friendships that I developed out of that program. Yeah. So sometimes I think it can be lonely being a practitioner, because we're trying to build our repertoire of expertise, but we aren't necessarily in a system or program that holds us through that.
Mm.
So in-person classes came back on last year for my training program, because we went online, and it was just like, wow.
Are you
Like,
real?
it was just like, it was amazing. I was
Mm.
so happy that I got to do kind of my last year in person.
Mm. Yeah, a great way to finish the cycle. Yeah, just meeting them, like, oh, this is really how you are. Okay, wonderful. Nice to really meet you. Like, I love that in English, you can add any kind of terminology to any word, and like, meeting someone is really a thing now. I'm just like, well, am I really meeting you? Like, that's crazy. Well,
We're
I'm glad for you.
e-meeting, but I love
Yeah.
France, and I would
Yeah.
love to get back to France. So
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
actually meet in
You're
person.
welcome in the south of France for sure. Yeah, so cool.
What town are you in the south,
I'm
of?
in between Toulouse and Albi.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jane. I know we are hitting the 1 hour time, and I was curious if you have, just to wrap it up, any oncoming or upcoming workshop or classes that you're offering.
Thank you so much
My pleasure.
for letting me share about that. I have
Mm.
a Jungian Somatics 6-week training program.
Mm.
It's more experiential than a how-to program that starts in September again. And we touch on key pillars of Jungian somatics, which include kind of transference, countertransference from an embodied standpoint, active imaginations, somatics of dream interpretation,
Mm.
um, the neurobiology of spirituality through a Jungian perspective. And yeah, so I love that program. It's sort of like a taste of each of the pillars and hoping that people dive deeper into areas that they're really interested in. And then I have a program called Awe. It's a 3-part webinar series about really intentionally building a search for awe in our daily lives.
Mm.
Yeah, kind of getting on the board so that we're ready
Mm.
for something powerful to come and move us as on a daily basis. I like that idea. So that's starting in mid-July. And then I have, it might be too late for that. Wednesday, I have a program called Food and the Unconscious,
Mhm.
where we bring in depth psychology and
Mm.
our understanding of our complex relationship with food,
Mm.
to bring in a deeper awareness of what drives our relationship with food. So, yeah.
Mm. Wow, I love those topics, and like how deep you can go, even though it's just, as you said, a taste, but still, like it's quite complete. So appreciate that. And everything online, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
everything's online.
So you can,
And you can find it at janeclapp.com or
yeah,
jungiansomatics.com and sign up for my newsletter if you want to.
yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Going old school.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you again for your time and your insights. And I mean, I could have like many other questions, but like
I
it
know,
was
I
a
feel the same.
pleasure.
I feel like we
Well,
could have a
thank
lot
you.
to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for having
definitely.
me. I really appreciate it so
My
much.
pleasure. Thank you. And thank you everyone for either watching or listening to us, and talk soon.